Good evening, everyone. So great to see people in person. Yes, come on in, come on in. All right, so good evening. On behalf of the University of Minnesota, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. This evening rounds off the 2021-2022 Power and Privilege series. This year, the series focused on conscious activism. Nicole Cardoza led a workshop series in the fall, and we are happy to have her in person tonight. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on native land. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is not enough to make this acknowledgement without encouraging you to gain a greater understanding of the original people of this land. My name is Najma Yusuf, and I am the Assistant Director of Multicultural Student Engagement, a unit in the Office for Student Affairs. We hope that tonight's event will be a space for both examining wellness and critical self-reflection for us as a community, and for the action that must result from that kind of critical self-reflection. I'd like to acknowledge that the Power and Privilege series is generously supported by the Vice President's Office for Student Affairs. So thank you, Dr. Calvin Phillips, and we are endlessly grateful for the outpouring of support this series has received from those that have attended. Thank you. So in honor of Black History Month, please stand as you are able and sing the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing. Also like to acknowledge our team, our director Anis Mazone, and our student employees Gwen King Lundy, Abdi Aziz Yusuf, and Maggie Odumi-Yua, our student workers in multicultural student engagement. They are committed to and true champions of this work. For the Q&A this evening, we will use the index card process. In a few minutes, Abdi Aziz will come through and collect note cards with your questions, and Nicole will address the questions collected following her presentation, unless you've already written them and put them in the basket out there. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gwen, and I'm a junior double majoring in African American and African Studies and Sociology. I also work for the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement, and thank you for being here with us tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Nicole Cardoza is a social entrepreneur, speaker, and educator passionate about equitable well-being. Her studio, Reclamation Ventures, celebrates and incubates innovative businesses committed to racial equity, including Anti-Racism Daily and Welly Mental. Her fund makes early-stage and philanthropic investments into leaders making well-being more accessible in their communities. She is a 2017 Forbes 30 Under 30 and has been recognized as one of the most influential change makers in wellness by Well and Good and Wanderlust. She's taught yoga across the globe and now speaks regularly on the intersection of wellness, entrepreneurship, and anti-racism at Fortune 500 companies, colleges and universities, and conferences and summits. Please welcome me in introducing Nicole Cardoza.
Hi. Thank you so much for that. Is it okay if I, turn this on? Thank you. I think I'm gonna walk around. It's so lovely to see all of your faces. Thank you so much for joining me. I had the pleasure of hosting a workshop on this subject this past fall, and that was virtual. This is one of my first talks in person at a university since the start of the pandemic, and so I am simply honored to be with each of you. Did anybody here participate in that workshop in the fall? Hello, 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 hi. It's so nice to see you in real life. I might call on you if that's all right during this conversation. Maybe now you regret raising your hands. But like I said, it's just really exciting to be here. My name is Nicole, and over the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about conscious activism. And I say we because this is going to be a conversation, not just me lecturing to you for the next few minutes. And this is going to be hopefully a workshop that we can put into action as we move forward. So if you are the type of person that likes to take notes and you have a notebook with you, by all means have that out. If you want to use your phone, I will not be offended. I am totally fine with that. I just want to make sure that we can all be as engaged with this as possible. We had this workshop titled Conscious Activism, which I think is important to break down because I think both of those words are overused sometimes and labeling a lot of activities that might not feel very conscious or very active. So for me, I like to start with activism. What I know about activism generally, and what it means to be an activist, so to speak, is doing direct action to change the systems around you. Whether that's politically, socially, economically, interpersonally, emotionally. Seems pretty simple. That direct action could be a number of things, like how you vote, what you buy, what else? I think I hear things, but it's really hard to from here. Any other ways that you can take action? What you wear, yes, thank you. Where you spend your time. I think things as simple as how we treat other people. Say that again? How you think? Yeah, how you think. And how that shows up when you interact with the world around you. If you look at that example, and we could list many more of these too, but if you look at that definition, you're kind of taking action just by existing on this planet. I truly believe that, which is a little bit different than what I think we think activism means, especially in this time, right? Like not everybody's an activist just because they woke up this morning. I would think some people would feel that way. But I want us to remember that direct support, the way that we can change the world, might be more simple than we think. And that we're taking action regardless if we're investing in the change that we want to see in the world. So being an activist is a little bit broader maybe than what you might see on social media, the people leading protests, although obviously that's very important and necessary. But it also calls us to be more accountable for the way that we show up in the world. For recognizing that it's not just the things that we choose because we think that those are the things that we can do, and then we can, move out of that space to be in relationship with the cause that we want to change. How we choose to engage isn't enough because we are engaging no matter how conscious we are, right? So that's why we really need to focus on the conscious part of this word. It's to be really clear that we are already operating within this system. And to be quite frank, a lot of times that we are active in a system that we don't like, we might be doing the opposite of what we intend. Like, for example, capitalism might not be my favorite thing in the world. I think that there's more effective models that we could use that can further our collective well-being. I don't know what those are. And I still buy groceries because I need to eat, right? I got some cute shoes recently. I like them a lot. They're fun. So I'm engaging in a system that might not yield the results of what I want them to do, right? I might be investing in a supply chain that might not be as ethical as I'd like, right? These shoes are made in Singapore. I don't know the process of that. So I got to own that, right? But I am contributing to an economic system, a social system, a political system, perhaps not in the way that I choose. Now, am I telling you that you have to start dismantling every single thing that you do? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is how can we be more conscious and aware of those things? And how can we identify as many opportunities as possible for us to leverage the same things that we do day in, day out to go towards the space that we want to do. So towards the space that we want to see and the future we want to leave for the people that follow us. So consciousness, or to be conscious, is usually, you'd use many different definitions, but there's kind of three parts I really like about it. One, as being aware. Kind of makes sense. You use consciousness to make sure people are aware. If they were unconscious, can you hear things? Can you see things? Can you operate any senses that you have? Feel vibrations? Makes sense. But awareness, as we know, is oftentimes insufficient to driving action. So I like the second part of consciousness too, which is being able to respond to your surroundings. Now again, from a physiological perspective, when we talk about consciousness, that's like, can you hear things that are happening? Can you see things? Maybe you fainted and hit your head. People are asking, how many fingers am I holding up? Who's the president? You know, you see that stuff in like the Grey's Anatomies of the world, right? But how can we be responding to our surroundings? So that doesn't just mean that we need to be able to have awareness. We have to be able to be in relationship to where we are. And that relationship is going to change based on the scenario, right? And then the third part of being conscious is, are we able to execute our bodily functions in the way that are right for us? Right? So if you're asking me how many fingers can I see, if I'm somebody who can see, I can tell you how many fingers. There might be a different way I would respond if I don't have that ability to have sight, right? So you've got three parts to the awareness thing, pretty straightforward. I think we all got that. Our response to our surroundings, so understanding our role in our surroundings, what's happening around us. And then third, and most importantly, how are we showing up based on the capacity that we have? From a physiological perspective, that might be really straightforward. But in order to think about conscious activism as a whole, to be able to change the way that we engage in systems for the better, for what we've decided, what collectively we have decided for the greater good, not just mine, but in response to my surroundings and the people that I know, I have to be really clear about my capacity. And that means cultivating an awareness of what I can offer and contribute in every moment, at every time, in the different surroundings that I face. Now, luckily, that last part is not a decision we have to make on our own. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can identify our role in social change and the issues that mean most to us. But it also means identifying the larger systems as a whole and what other people are contributing. And I think both of those things together will help us to be able to make change. Now, usually in this kind of conversation, I start talking about the why. Why is it so important to make social change and all of that? But I'm not going to come to this city in this month at this time and tell any of you why this work is important. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince y'all that we need to make some changes in this world. All right? So know that just because I'm not talking about those things today doesn't mean that I know that they're not there, because they're here. And y'all are witnessing them in a way that I'm not. I'm based in Austin, Texas. We're witnessing a lot of other things right now. But y'all are witnessing something different. And so maybe that's top of mind to you. Maybe global issues are top of mind to you right now. But whatever those things are, I want you to carry them in this work moving forward in the next 30, 40 minutes, however much time we have left in this lecture. All right? Bring them into this room and know that we're all bringing whatever we care so deeply about, whatever's keeping us up at night. That's the reason that we're all here talking about this work together. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about how we identify our roles. I'm asked to do this kind of talk all the time because I run a newsletter that talks about racial issues all the time, but I don't know what I'm doing 99.9% of the time. And I don't think many other people that are called into this space to lead also know that too. I think the most important thing I've noticed from talking to community organizers and social justice leaders and incredible individuals making change is that they're embracing the fact that they don't know. That there is no clear or easy way to do this work. There's just doing the work. So is there any experts in here? Does anybody know how all of this stuff is done? Because we can switch if you want to be up here. Then maybe you, like me, are kind of feeling like I really don't know how to get started. I'm looking for more ways to create change. I'm toiling away at things every day and I'm not seeing the results that I want. I've followed generations of people who have been doing this work and I still can't understand that we're still here. To that, I can't tell you, I don't know. But all I do know is that we all have the capacity to make change. What I do know is that effective organizing over time has created the progress that we have seen, the changes that we have benefited from, and will only continue to do that moving forward. And so know that you are exactly where you need to be. You have all the tools that you need. And most importantly, this work needs you, even if you feel like it doesn't. Okay? Cool? All right, you're all hired. Great. Next, moving on. So to identify our role and to understand that, we have to be really clear that we have something to contribute. That doesn't mean it's anything about like what you do at your jobs or that you're really good at singing or whatever. It just means that it already means that you're somehow in relationship to the people around you. How many of you came here with somebody? Yeah. Some people are sitting close together. Y'all can move up at some point too if you want. I promise I don't bite. But so if you're already here with somebody, you have already done some work together with somebody else. Both of you played a role to get to this space physically. Maybe one of you drove, one of you mapped directions, one of you RSVP'd the two. Right? And in a very micro way, that is organizing. More importantly, nobody here, I don't think, did anybody just wander in here randomly? Without even seeing the signs outside, right? So everybody came here because somehow we all were able to organize and find a way to bring people into this room. We had people that promoted the event outside, that put up the beautiful signs. Probably this lovely team in the front row, right? I came. That was my job, to be here in this room. What else? Did anybody take public transportation? Anybody take an Uber or a Lyft? Anybody here pay tuition for this school? Donate to this event? Okay. I'm trying to call everybody into this room. So many of us have made this event possible, made this work happen, and hopefully by the end of this was worth your time, and we're all able to move forward. And so even though it might not feel like it, all the actions that happen to make everybody come into this room are the same things that we need to do to dismantle the hard and scary shit. Right? I'm really inspired by Deepa Iyer. She has a framework called, it's part of the organization, the Building Movement Project. She has a social change ecosystem that helps identify different roles that people can take in any kinds of social change. So we're going to use this gathering of this event to kind of mimic some of those. One of them is the amplifier role. The person that is sharing and promoting and whatnot, that might be, for you, it might be because you share a lot of stuff on social media. Maybe you saw this event and you shared the flyer with a friend. Maybe you printed the flyers that were sitting outside. An amplifier is one that's going to see work happening and share it out more broadly. In many ways, if you read my newsletter, that is what we do at our newsletters. We find the issues that need to be addressed. We collate the resources. We point people towards action items. whether that's supporting a cause or ways that they can bring this conversation into their own communities. Amplifier. Maybe that's something you do outside of this all the time. Maybe you're the person that finds like the cool museums to go to, the new restaurants. So that's one. We also have the builders. Any builders in the room? Builders are people that like to make stuff. Now you'll notice you can be more than one of these roles. Builders are people that like to create from the ground up. That might be deciding what this organization looks like, what this program looks like, deciding what this night's going to be like, physically building the space that we are sitting in, creating the idea for the AV for tonight to ensure that those that aren't here physically in this room are watching right now too. Builders like to quote unquote get their hands dirty, but might be really interested in organization, in identifying roles of other people. I think about caregivers, parents as builders in a way, how they structure and create what the family looks like a lot of times. That can also be a role that children or friends do when we create the families that we wish to be a part of, builders. We've also got healers. Now, healers are people that are ensuring that we stay well. In order for us to be able to do conscious activism work, for us to be aware and understanding of our functions, to be able to make clear, direct support when we want to, we have to be well in some way. We have to feel some sense of resourceness in our lives. Healers are the kind of people that are ensuring that we stay well. I'm not just talking about, being able to take a yoga class maybe this evening, or getting a really good massage. I'm talking about the people that make sure that you're fed, that are ensuring that spaces like this are clean and lit and accessible. Healers oftentimes take on the role of ensuring, maybe they're the person when everybody's out at night being like, is everybody okay? Y'all have a ride home? Like, are we all good? I don't know if anybody's ever been that person or has benefited from that person, but healers are incredibly important. In our traditional idea of activism, we tend to think about people that are on the front lines, and oftentimes the healers are not often the people that we would see, But when we talk about direct support, like protesting, for example, healers are oftentimes the reasons people are able to be out there for so long. Oftentimes they're the reason why there'll be minimal interactions with the police. People out there ensuring the collective safety and well-being of other people. There are 10 roles altogether in this, so I'm only going to share a few. In the full workshop, we went through each of them last fall, and I'm happy to share it out to anybody else who wants to see it this evening. But there is a space for you. So I want you to take a moment and go to the person next to you and talk to them about the kinds of roles that you have in your own families or communities. Not necessarily how do you show up maybe as part of this whole campus or the entire city, but a smaller interpersonal group. Does that make sense? Like maybe like your colleagues versus your entire company. Just talk for a couple of minutes with somebody next to you. If you're listening into this, I'd love for you to write down what are some of the roles that you take on for other people. How do you take care, and how are you taken care of? But write down specifically the ones that you see yourself playing. And we'll see if we'll get all 10 together. I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay, let's come back together and share with the group. I'd love to hear somebody share what the other person, or a couple of the roles the other person told you. What have we got? Yes?
C is the person who will create fun for the friend group and get people out of the house and get people finding things to find joy.
I love that. Thank you. Z, is that right? So Z is the person that gets people to have fun, to get out of the house, to do new things. Was there like a level of playfulness in there that I'm hearing? Yeah, wonderful. Any other of those roles? Or similar roles come up? Well, that's wonderful. Z, you're very useful here. Tell us what we're doing after this. Right? So Z's coming in with a role that's pretty unique in this group. In our group of social change, in our ecosystem right here, right now. Thank you for bringing that here. What else? Nothing. Sure, that would be lovely.
Kate here has said that she is, I guess, flowers is a healer kind of type, and where she's giving people the space to process kind of their emotions and what they want to do, and supporting them more in, I guess, intimate, closer way. Yeah, so that's what I got.
I love that.
That's her kind of doing.
My friends say I always ask very philosophical questions.
Ooh, okay. Philosophical questions. Thank you. So Kate taking on a healer role, holding space to process, asking the philosophical questions. Wonderful. Similar healers in the room. Yes, okay, a couple of healers. Grateful to have you here, keeping us a resource. What else? One more would be helpful. Oh, yes, thank you.
Nadia is more of a builder.
A healer?
More of a builder than I came with.
Ooh, a builder and an amplifier. So Najma likes to build things, create things. I think we talked about this in our session last fall. Wonderful. And then you said you're an amplifier? Is that correct? Beautiful. Amazing. I love this. So as we come together, each of you have your own roles that you play in your spaces. If we are all coming together right now with something that we can bring into this room, maybe some of you are unsure what roles that you play. Hearing somebody else's, seeing it come to life, may make you realize what other roles that you might help you understand what other roles you might take on in your own work. It also helps us to understand what some people can do to see what else is needed, right, in this space. We're not going to go through all 10, like I said, we don't have time, unfortunately, but if we did, we could figure out, maybe there's somebody here, for example, who's a great storyteller that we don't have. And it might not even be something that you realize, but it's something that you know you can step into. So as you move forward in this work in your life, own what you can contribute to a group, even if it feels uncomfortable or scary. Name that, especially where you're at the point of taking direct action. Oftentimes when we talk about conscious activism, it's in a state of reaction and not in a state of response. I see a lot of people nodding because I can imagine that feels very resonant over the past 2 years, where this conversation has sparked from recently, right? From May 2020. So we oftentimes are called into this work with the idea that we have all the answers, we know exactly who we are, we're very well resourced, we're very well connected, and we can make immediate change. And we know that that's not necessarily how things always work, even when it's expected of us. And so it might feel odd to be in this room talking about us being a social change ecosystem and what roles we're going to take on to change things, right? Because y'all didn't sign up for that. You just came for a talk, right? It's like, Monday night? You're pretty tired. I get it. I just flew here. But what if we spent more time when we're not reacting, preparing on how we can respond? What if we spent more time identifying how we can actively contribute to a group for the change that we wish to seek, even when the entire country isn't protesting for it at the same time, right? So spend a bit more time understanding the roles that you play interpersonally and how they show up. Get comfortable naming them with other people. Just as much as you can do that, you can also name what you don't do, what you don't feel as comfortable with, which might feel a bit more unfamiliar to you. So you can either prepare for those things if you feel like you may be called for them in the moments where they're needed, or you can spend more time actively identifying those roles in the communities where you are. Right? I'm a big picture kind of visionary person. I do not like spreadsheets. Do not trust me with a budget. I am entirely unorganized. I lose my keys maybe twice a week. That kind of operational, logistical kind of role in a social change ecosystem, not my thing. Can I do it if I have to? Yeah, I can. I can try. But I know those people who can make lists. My girlfriend and I are both big picture people. So in the interpersonal social change ecosystem of the two of us, we're going to be losing a lot of keys, and we can know that, and we can be prepared for that in advance. It sounds silly, but when we think about this work and we're called into things urgently, right, it's important to know what's going to happen and be able to anticipate those responses and allow ourselves to be resourced in what we can do best. Because I guarantee you in the ecosystems that you go in every single day, you being as resourced as possible is the most effective thing. Because when you are most resourced, you can resource other people too. Make sense? The ecosystems that we're operating in when we want to create change vary all the time. Sometimes we think of them as just our action groups around those issues directly, right? Like I'm doing a lot of campaigning right now in Texas around the attack on trans rights, and so that's a very clear ecosystem, right? We've got our calls, we've got our action items, our goals. I did not make those agendas, that's not my thing, right? So I know that that's there, right? But I also am in an ecosystem where I can be actively addressing those things, or at least resourcing myself for those things when I'm with my partner, right? When I'm talking with my team. Our roles might change slightly when we're in those different ecosystems, but be really mindful of how you're coming together there and how you can engage. So the first thing that like I said, we have to start to identify our roles. If you have time tonight, over the next few weeks, start to map yourself against either this Building Movement Project framework or any framework of like the roles that you see yourself taking on in different spaces, how resourced you feel for them, and what helps you stay resourced to stay in that work. Allow that to evolve based on the spaces that you're in, based on how you grow. Sometimes we find ourselves taking on a role and then becoming, adapt at it. We adapt into it. Maybe we realize it's something that we want to do, and we can call in people to take on the things that we were doing previously. And these roles are not just the roles that we have in like when we're feeling really good and talking to people we might not know on, a Monday night in a room. But it's also important to identify how we handle conflict in those roles. Because whenever we are working to change systems for the better, we're oftentimes going to run into friction. And that friction can often yield interpersonal or systemic conflict. Which oftentimes discourages people from doing the work. Sometimes we're so afraid of breaking the egg, so to speak, that we forget to make the omelet. And I don't really like that analogy until I thought about what happens when nobody gets to eat. And when we abandon the task completely. Like what impact that makes, you know? What's lost when we become unwilling to address conflict? Some of us already know, I would imagine that many of us have dealt with conflict at some point in our lives, in our relationships. I don't know if you haven't. Again, let's switch. Conflict interpersonally, at least, is just a normal part of being in relationship to one another. But when we find ourselves talking about different issues, especially around race, the isms, racism, sexism, we start talking about homophobia. Oftentimes people are so afraid that they're going to hurt somebody because they don't know the answers. And so in your role, wherever you are, whatever work that you're doing, how do you feel when conflict is happening? There's a couple of ways to do this. First of all, what are some of the physiological sensations you may feel when conflict is happening? Actually, let's take a step back. What is conflict to you in a relationship? You don't have to answer me this. I usually get a lot less hands around this time, so you don't have to tell me what that is. But what does conflict look like in some of the roles that you take on? When you are the person that encourages everybody to go out and have fun, for example, like Z named before, what comes up being that leader? You don't have to answer, but what comes up? Right? And again, I'm trying to allow us to abstract this stuff away from the issues at hand, because how we show up in one part of our role is oftentimes how we show up in all of them. It's a lot easier to practice and to attune ourselves to conflict and conflict resolution when we're not in this moment of a reactionary response and we're not dealing with some of the issues that this work is centered on. So what does that conflict look like, and how does it show up in your body? I'm like a palms are sweaty kind of person. Sweat under my armpits. I find myself backing away a lot when I feel tension, when I feel conflict. How can you notice those physiological sensations so that you can start to address them in that moment? And then what tools or skills or resources have you cultivated in your life to address conflict? This is something I've studied for a while. I found it really fascinating. I used to run a nonprofit that brings yoga and mindfulness to schools. I started this work, all of this work that I do as a yoga instructor in schools and working with kids. A big source of conflict that would happen in the classroom, especially between kids and the teacher, is attention. Kids aren't paying attention, right? I was that kid in school where the teacher was telling me like all the time, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. One thing that I noticed pretty quickly through this work and many others in the field of mindfulness in schools is that we oftentimes tell kids to pay attention, but we never teach them how. What does it actually mean to cultivate awareness aside from just saying it? What does it mean to actually pay attention aside from just saying it? Maybe eyes up front, look at the teacher, but what is attention? Where do we have time to practice attention? Truly practicing, cultivate it, and be aware of what's drawing our attention away as children. That's very rare. It used to be rare, at least in schools. I think a lot of that is changing. But there's many things that happen in our lives. If you were born and raised in the United States and are kind of like absorbed into dominant culture like I am, many things that we address in terms of conflict, we were never really taught. One of the biggest things of this work, I think, is knowing how to apologize, which I never knew. I was kind of taught to say I'm sorry all the time. If I was taking up too much space, if I was too loud or whatever, probably has a lot to do with being raised as like a young black girl in an all-white community, right? I was saying sorry even when I wasn't and when I had nothing to apologize for. But at the same time, I never really learned how to be truly accountable for my actions as a child. So I'm still learning it as a grown-up, as a 32-year-old standing here talking about it. But it's actually interesting because we're oftentimes not taught how to apologize in any kind of formal education system. And there's studies that show that people that apologize in the United States are tend to seen as weak. So in any position of power, it's actually looked down upon to apologize. I don't know if you've seen any politicians really apologize for anything, or Fortune 500 company leaders apologize for anything. Maybe you're watching stuff unfold online and some of these people with big power put up a notes app on their Instagram with some kind of like half-baked kind of, I'm sorry, but I'm not, or I'm sorry that hurt you. So what I said was taken out of context. All of this is just to say that when we are faced with interpersonal conflict in particular and broader social change work, which should be expected when we're trying to dismantle old systems and build new, we need these kinds of tools to be able to stay in relationship to one another, to be truly aware of our surroundings and responsive to our surroundings, and in relationship with people that we're mutually dependent upon for our own self, our own well-being, and also for the advancement of the work that we're in. So there's a few steps to apologizing that I've heard about that I can share with you. I'm sure you can do your work on your own. It's one of many things that we can think about conflict. It takes first really truly understanding what we did and putting the impact of what we did before the intention of what happened. Is anybody here familiar with impact and intention? Is that something that, yeah. Okay, so we have the whole hitting a car kind of thing, running over somebody's foot. Okay, yeah, no. A couple of no's. The analogy is that if you run over somebody's foot with your car, usually if you do that, oftentimes the person doesn't get out of the car and say, I didn't mean to run over your foot, because the problem in this, the tension happened because somebody's foot was run over. Make sense? It's really difficult to ignore that kind of part of the interaction that happened there. But in most times when we address conflict as individuals, we're trained, it's normalized to say, well, that wasn't my intention. So, shoulders up, body back, hands up, out of relationship. And so it's more important to focus on the impact. I ran over your foot. That I did that. I caused you harm. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do? Ownership moving in. Acknowledgement, eye contact, all of that. The important thing that it's important to think about how we are addressing conflict and what capacity we have for doing this work for activism. Because like I said, we can't do this work alone. But also because most of this work is really about creating spaces for us to feel safer individually and collectively, wherever we are. Our interdependence on one another requires us to be thinking about the safety of ourselves and the safety of those around us. That's where that resourcing comes in. I don't believe that we can resource ourselves without being in a position of relative safety. Does that make sense? Oftentimes we talk about creating safe space or building systems of safety as if it's a place that we can go. But Mariame Kaba recently said that safety is not an object. It's not something that we can obtain. It's a relation. Safety is how we do this work, in my opinion. And I think in order for us to be able to do this work safely, to allow each one of us to thrive in whatever role we have in our ecosystems, we have to be able to address conflict in a way that makes the other person feel safer, right? That adds security to the relation that we are holding. The other part about this that's critically important is that, remember before I said that I don't know what I'm doing? We're collectively doing work where we might not know exactly what it looks like. I know there's a lot that we can understand about what needs to be dismantled. You know, some of the challenges of the system. I talked about capitalism. Like, yeah, I can look at that and I can look at the stats and the numbers and listen to really smart people and understand that. But I don't know if we truly know what that answer is. I mean, if we think about social change here in the United States, we are a very, very young country. We're a baby. We have no idea what we can grow into. We have no idea what we're truly capable of if we are building a future that's radically different from the way that we got here. Because I sure as hell know that the violence that caused the start of this nation is not how I want it to move forward, right? So we have to be clear in the not knowing. We have to find some level of comfort or an acceptance of the discomfort and a way to build relative safety with one another when we are reimagining something entirely different and new. And that might feel really radical. I'm very radical when it comes to policy change. I do believe that we need to have something that's completely reimagined. But even if you want to argue about moderate reform, we're still trying to reform on systems that are new and young and untested. Wherever we are going, the only thing that can provide us any type of relative safety is how we treat one another. And the conscious awareness that we have with how we hold space and how we define our roles. When we do that, whether it's here or at home or in your office or at your company, we allow each other to thrive. What we need now more than ever is the capacity for us to be able to imagine, to envision a future that isn't harbored by the threat of today. I deeply believe that imagination, play, creativity, daydreaming, stuff you might not think about in the traditional role of activism work, that's what tomorrow is. Because the twisted dreams of people in the past is the reason that we're here today. Dreams that were limited to a certain group of people with a certain level of power who decided that this would be our reality. So as we move forward into tomorrow, don't think that any fanciful notions of the world that you want are just that. Allow those dreams of liberation, of justice, of whatever it is for you, your word. Allow that to be your beacon. Allow that to influence your role. Allow that to be how you hold space for one another. I said early on that being conscious is being aware and responsive to our surroundings, but that means our dreams need to be part of that too. We need to keep those as part of the thing that informs us, as much as, holding space for what is, right? We have to acknowledge where we are today. We have to understand where we are. We need to hold those fantasies a little bit closer to heart. Because I truly think that's how we get to where we need to be. And most importantly, when we all commit to doing that in our roles together, we ensure that no one gets left behind. So that's what I will leave you with. I know we're going to go into Q&A. And I think there's some things to write down, some questions. But the question I leave you with is, what does that tomorrow look like? What does tomorrow look like? If you're resourced and connected with those around you today. Thank you. Of course.
Oh, hello. Okay, thank you so much, Nicole, for that amazing presentation. Let's give her another round of applause. We'll be going into a Q&A session here. As Abdiaziz is going around and collecting the rest of the questions, I will start off with one that was pre-written. Mm-hmm. So with over 250,000 subscribers, the Anti-Racism Daily is your newsletter that you mentioned that educates and mobilizes people to address racism and oppression in their communities. So is being not racist enough? And what does it mean to be anti-racist? And how can people be anti-racist in their daily lives?
Yeah. No, being not racist is not enough. I think sometimes, and I kind of talked about this, that some people think that like if they're static in change, that they're not causing any harm. It's like, oh, well, I'm just gonna sit back and not do anything. I'm not gonna do any of the bad stuff. I'm not racist, but I'm not gonna, really get into it. And I think it's from that fear that I mentioned before. But if you think about us moving forward, like cars on a highway, a destination that we need to go, how helpful is the person that sits in the middle of the road and turns off the engine? Not only are they not helpful, they're actively preventing things from moving forward. And so, no, it's not enough to be not racist, because when we do that, we disconnect ourselves from a group, an ecosystem of people that are trying to create change. And we take up space, quite frankly, from other people that could be guiding that discussion. What was the last part of that?
What does it mean to be anti-racist then? How can people be anti-racist in their daily lives?
There's a lot of people or companies too that are like, I'm an anti-racist person, an anti-racist organization. And it's like, what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for the people that you're in relationship with? I don't think that there's an easy way to say, this is how to be anti-racist. I think it's more about, these are the ways that I'm actively going to address and dismantle the racist systems and structures that are around us. And these are the ways that I'm going to reimagine what being in relationship looks like in a different lens. So a lot of times people will be like, I'm anti-racist because my company has a subscription to the ARD. And I'm like, that's not how that works. Like, this newsletter is not making you an anti-racist. It's how you're actually showing up, not if you're reading, words on a screen. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. And then conscious activism, as we know, requires the disciplined practice of holding and recognizing the other as an embodiment of our common humanity. For those who find it challenging to find a common ground with the other, what is your advice to them in their endeavors of creating social change?
The other is, I don't know what the other is, but let's say it's like maybe somebody that we're not in a relationship with that might have like very opposing views. I think it's one, grounding on the shared values and principles that we have. Because most of us want to feel safe. We want to feel supported. We want to be happy in some way, right? And so understanding like those things and the fears and hesitations that we have, even if our policy we have different views in policy, we have different views in what safety looks like and what people we want to be in relationship with, is understanding at the end of the day, we're all really grounded in the same kind of humanity. And it's a matter of figuring out what works best for us and what we have the capacity to change with who we're in relationship with. So I think that's really important. And as we sit in these conversations too, it's like, who is missing? What narratives are missing? And how can we ensure that those voices are here? Whether it's a hyper-conservative voice or another marginalized identity that you're not engaged with, it's like, how are you consistently hearing and understanding those perspectives, bringing those people into the room where possible, so that your response is much more well-rounded.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to transition to a question from the audience. This person asks, as a POC, how do I both call people out that they are racist or ignorant without exhausting myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. And I think the answer, it might be different based on, sorry, I keep forgetting I need this. The answer, I think, will differ each day for you. How can you stay most resourced? And how can you identify when you have the capacity to call somebody out? I want people of color to know that are in the room that it's not your job every single time to take this work on. It's not. And even if you take that work on every single time to call somebody out every single time, you will not single-handedly end racism in the United States or this world, right? That's just I'm saying this from personal experience, from literally talking about racism every single day. We oftentimes, especially if we're like, one of the few in spaces, like this space potentially, it feels like it's our job, because if we don't do it, somebody else, who else will? The one thing you owe to yourself and everybody around you, especially other people of color, is your resourceness, your well-being. And so if you find yourself having to choose between educating somebody else and taking care of yourself, I want you to pour back into you. Because even if you experience something and you want to say it, of course, but like, you are making such an impact by being who you are. Your life, the space that you're holding right now, whatever you're doing, is absolutely revolutionary. So know that that is more than enough. And then if you're listening to this and you're not a person of color, like, know that you can also be that person, right? Like, know that you can also be the person to say, hey, that didn't land well with me, right? How can we take on the work for other people that might feel really burdened by it? Because that's a real thing. I get this question in almost every single talk that I do. So thank you for bringing it in, whoever you are. And yeah.
Just going off of that, we know that compassion is an important concept in social justice movements, and oftentimes the meaning of compassion is centered towards others while often ignoring the emotional well-being of the self. So how can people care for themselves in social justice and advocacy work, and why is it so important?
Yeah, because oftentimes people aren't going to fill up your cup for you, right? Especially if you're a marginalized person, like I said before that example. I think generally speaking, we oftentimes, we live in a land that really loves to value personal responsibility. Our country does. Whenever I say this, by the way, I'm always talking about like what is like dominant culture in the US that's like really like based on like white male, heteronormative principles. But if you're listening to this and you're like, well, my family didn't raise me that way, or I have different cultural values, I hear you. I can only talk about like the broad kind of ecosystem, right? So that's what I say when I say we. I know that we're all very different, but like in this ecosystem that we live in, the United States is very keen on personal responsibility. And so that oftentimes we feel like when we're doing this work that relies on mutual interdependence, if it's not going well, it's because of me, right? And so we shame ourselves. So we need to really understand. We'll give other people compassion to a better extent than we'll give ourselves. Has anybody else done that? Or like realize that how you talk to yourself in your head, you would never say that to your friend, right? Your friend will come to you with the same problem you're experiencing. You'd be like, oh my God, girl, like you were just going through so much. And then you'll go home and you'll be looking at your own problems and you're like, why did you do this again, Nicole? Like, what is wrong with you? So yeah, I think it's most important that we figure out how to talk to ourselves in that way, because it starts to break down some of this white supremacist culture that teaches us that it all comes down onto us individually, me individually. Does that make sense? And so we need to be able to dismantle that in our own selves for us to be able to change the collective and build a community that does that more freely. And then also it keeps us in the work from a more basic perspective of just keeping ourselves well. Especially in this work, there's a lot of things we don't know. There's terminology and phrases. Our lexicon of this work and how we are in relationship with one another is changing so quickly. That's beautiful, because sometimes we forget that we are creating change and redefining this nation at a very rapid rate. There is a lot of shit we need to fix. But there is a lot that has changed in my 32 years of existence that my grandmother never thought was possible. But when we do that, when we move fast, we break a lot of things, we create a lot of friction, and that means that there's going to be terminology we don't know. It means that there's going to be things that we didn't learn in school. I mean, hello, I didn't learn half of the stuff I know until I became a grown adult and the internet existed. So, and I got a phone when I was in 5th grade, right? So my relationship to understanding and knowledge is different than my generations past. It'll be hella different for the generations that are coming. So we have to know that there's going to be things we don't know. We're literally making shit up and reimagining things as we go. That is the best place to be. So we have to be compassionate when we mess up.
That was a great answer. Thank you. Another audience member asks, what are some lessons we have not yet learned about the pandemic and activism and or anti-racism and wellness?
Ooh, I mean, the thing that comes top of mind to me, because this is something I also have had the privilege of not understanding, is our relationship to disability in the United States. We have not been handling or addressing disability rights and supporting disabled people in this nation the way that we should, period. But now we're 2 years into a global pandemic where people got sick 2 years ago and are still sick, where we don't even know the effects of long-term COVID, when it's likely that the disabled population, as we define it today in the US, will triple. We don't have the capacity to support where we are right now. We're woefully inadequate of how we're supporting disabled people today. And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't think we've learned that lesson. And I think it's only going to become more dire in the future. I see that as the biggest thing affecting, specifically our healthcare system when I think about wellness. I think that's going to be the greatest challenge of the next decade. One of the greatest challenges of the next decade.
Sure. Another question is, do you have advice for finding your space where you would be best resourced?
Yeah. One is identifying how you show up for other people. I really like listening to people. I'm the person that sits, like, I'm not a really extroverted person. I know I'm like up on stage. That's like gives me the heebie-jeebies. But like, I'm the kind of person that likes to sit in a room and listen to people's stories. It takes me a while to process information. So sometimes like people will be talking about things. I'm like, I gotta go home and like research that and write it out and look at a couple different sources. The newsletter that I publish every day, that's just how I process things. And so I think it's just important to know, like, this is, like, how do you show up? What is natural to you? Maybe even, like, what are things that you feel uncomfortable with about your own self, right? Like I just said. Because odds are there's somebody else like you that feels similarly, that will feel more heard by you stepping into that. And then, two, you have a role. Because there's a lot of people with a lot of things to say. I can listen and collate information and share their great work, you know? There are a lot of smart people out there. I don't have to be that smart person. But I can learn from them and share their stuff and amplify it. And so figure out where you already are. A lot of us too are placed into positions, roles that we might not have actually chosen. So identify like where you feel conflict too. Like a lot of jobs that we might take on, you know, a lot of like jobs, especially for younger people in the United States, tend to be like more customer service, you know, being at the behind the cashier kind of thing, or being behind the cash register as a cashier kind of thing, being a server. So those roles, if those feel uncomfortable to you, might tell you that maybe these are some of the things that you don't like to do, right?
The next question is, with so much work to do, how do I decide where to start?
What are you really fucking mad about? Sorry, that's what that's what I would say. Or you feel hopelessness or despair. You know, we tend to call them like difficult emotions. So those could be a number of things for you. And they can be on either end of the spectrum too. Like, what do you love to talk about? What are you obsessed with? That's where I would start. And it doesn't just have to be like the subject matter of the thing. Like, I really don't like racism because I'm a Black queer woman and like racism affects me. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense too. But like, what are other things you really are passionate about that you can use for this work? Right? I think oftentimes we, especially with creative pursuits, we tend to like undervalue things like art and how it can be used to create cultural change. Sometimes we undervalue some more of the structural rote things, like, you know, like organizing roadmaps, workflows, project management. Like, you can do that work for any cause and help that cause move forward if that's something you really love to do. Does that make sense? So you don't just have to like choose the cause. You can also choose how you're going to support any cause that's happening. The last thing I'll say too is like, what is affecting the people around you that you're in very close proximity with, right? A lot of people ask me that when they have incredible power and privilege and they don't have anything that they feel really directly impacted by. I talk about racism a lot because when I grew in my career and I was the only Black person in spaces, people expected me to talk about racism. I didn't like go to anti-racism school, right? Like, I had to like learn how to talk about the things that up until that point I only knew based on my lived experience, right? And lived experience is definitely a great teacher, obviously, but I didn't have the answers for like making yoga more inclusive for Black people just because I'm a Black person that does yoga. Like, you know? So that can happen to a lot of people and how they like choose to be in relationship to work. So with people that don't have to experience that kind of marginalization, we'll ask that. Understand what's happening like where you live in your neighborhood. And maybe it's not happening within your four walls. It means you have to do a lot of listening to figure that out. What do you have in your life that you might be taking for granted? People don't think about how like their green juice has gotten to their fridge. Or like why their sidewalks are really well done. So start noticing that kind of stuff and questioning how it got to the way that it did and questioning whether or not the people on the other side of your neighborhood have the same experience.
That's so insightful. Thank you so much. Another audience member asks, what is an example of an ethical challenge or trade-off you faced recently in your work and how did you navigate it?
Gosh, I mean, all the time. All the time. You know, something we're thinking a lot about is health insurance and how health insurance is tied to employment. Isn't necessarily a trade-off, I guess, but there's so many ways in which we operate as a business owner, like and how we operate and relate to the healthcare system and how we pay people. It makes absolutely no damn sense to me. And I also run a small business. So it's like I have to be engaging in these conversations all the time. And we're trying to build a workers' co-op with a few other organizations like mine and figure out a way to give health insurance to everybody, because most people that work on my stuff, writers for the ARD, the newsletter that I run, and then all of our yoga and mindfulness work, most of the people that we work with are contractors by nature. You freelance writers, write one piece and then move on. We pride ourselves in having a bunch of different writers for us. We definitely don't have the capacity to give everybody a salary in healthcare. I would love that. But we don't, right? Like we don't have that. So we're trying to figure out, is there a way that we could create a system where we could offer people healthcare in a more flexible way, or create some kind of like fund to be able to have freelancers be able to get healthcare pay from us. But then if you start doing extra pay, they got to pay more taxes off of it, and then it's like, okay, well, that's not going to work. So I kind of run into that all the time.
Sure.
And I don't know the answers to it.
You are the founder and CEO of Reclamation Ventures, and that's a studio and fund that invents and invests in companies with aspirations of building a better future. Can you tell us your inspiration behind the organization and the impact of the work that you do?
Yeah, I like to do a lot of things. I'm the visionary kind of person, and I never really just wanted to have like one job. I also started the newsletter thinking it would just be a newsletter I'd send to some family and friends and people that were asking me, what do I do, and not make it a company as it is today and have so many people read it. And so I found myself over the past couple of years juggling a lot of projects. I was always taught to just do one thing. Anybody else hear that? Like you should just do one thing and be really good at it and do it for the rest of your life. That was like my parents' dream, first kid to go to college kind of situation. But I'm finding that I really love to work on multiple projects that address an issue in different lenses. And so all of my work is around like health and racial equity, elevating our collective well-being. And so between being able to do more of like the advocacy kind of work with the newsletter and then the more direct programmatic support with Elemental, I'm also a magician, and I really love using magic in a way to like tell stories and actually reimagine and create spaces where we can dream. All of those things, like I said, are like those roles that we talked about before, right? Like every company, as the same way as individuals, has a role that they need to play in this work. And so the idea of the studio is like, how can we like invest in those different roles? We have companies that like I've started and my team work on. We give money to other companies that do different things than we do, which is pretty cool. And then we fund individuals that are doing this work on the ground so we can kind of look at ecosystem change in a broader way. So that's why I do it. Also because I'd get bored if I was just doing one thing all the time.
Sure. Well, if we have time later, we'd love to see a trick. I don't know.
I wish I brought something.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of our questions is, you are known as an illusionist who is passionate about reclaiming the right to feel celebrated, whole, and seen. And your quarterly newspaper, Black Magic, highlights the intersection of Black culture and magic. What does Black magic? What does Black magic mean to you, and what is your advice to others who are trying to understand the intersection of their own identities?
Ooh. I love magic. I got excited about magic because I've loved it since I was a kid. And as I grew older, I was like, I'm gonna go like use my big girl money and go see shows, because that sounds fun. And I'm sure there's like a lot of cool female magicians and Black magicians that are like doing work that I would really love to see. I wanna go support them. And I didn't find any, but when I was researching, I found that one of the first magicians in America, his name was Henry Box Brown. He was an enslaved man that mailed himself to freedom on the Underground Railroad and used the box that he traveled in on stage as a magician to tell the story of liberation. And his work, his narrative, became one of the most powerful stories for the abolitionist movement in the North. There's drawings that were made of him that were used as like anti-slavery propaganda. And it just really blew my mind that that was something I never thought about with magic. Like so many other kind of like speculative fiction, futuristic spaces that we can be in that allow us to dream. Magic is around suspending disbelief so that we can dream. It's literally what magic is about. It's oftentimes centered from a white male gaze. And magic is one of the performing arts that we have that could not be more white male. And yet, we have this wild story about somebody like Henry Box Brown here in the United States. We have people talking about Black girl magic and labeling it on any Black woman who's doing what they want to do, who's exercising the same freedoms that any other person would.
What a great way to end. Thank you so much. I love that idea of black magic and the way you, or not black magic, black girl magic and the way you articulated it. So thank you. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much, honestly.
Thank you all.
I hope you all were able to learn a little bit more about conscious activism and your role in this ecosystem. I hope you were able to write down a few nuggets to take with you, maybe if you weren't with someone here today, that you can go repeat to someone else. That's the way that you can keep it in your mind and continue to spread knowledge. So thank you all again. And again, Nicole, maybe the next time you come back, you can lead us in yoga.
Sure.
Or maybe magic, I don't know. But again, we really appreciate having you all here tonight. We really hope that you enjoyed being in person and not having to unmute on Zoom or any of those technical difficulties. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I saw her get up, so I was like, okay, cool. Mango.
Thank you.